Picture this for just 3 seconds. A man in a simple olive green t-shirt stands in a dimly lit street, phone held at arm's length. No script, no teleprompter, explosions echoing somewhere beyond the frame, and he says calmly, almost casually, "We are here." And in that instant, the world realizes something unbelievable has happened. So before you scroll away, before you assume you already know the story, stay with me. Because what you are about to witness is not just the rise of a president or the survival of a nation, but one of the most shocking character arcs of the modern age. A transformation so extreme that even history itself seemed unprepared for it. And if you watch to the end, you will understand how power, fear, performance, and destiny collided to turn a comedian into a wartime leader whose decisions now shape global history. And if stories of unexpected courage, psychological pressure, and human resilience matter to you, subscribe now and stay, because this story only gets more intense the deeper we go. And it begins not with tanks or missiles, but with laughter, bright studio lights, and a young boy born in 1978 in Kryvyi Rih, an industrial city in central Ukraine, where life was ordinary, sometimes hard, sometimes hopeful, and where no one could have predicted that this child, Volodymyr Zelensky, the son of a mathematics professor and an engineer, growing up in a Russian-speaking Jewish family during the final years of the Soviet Union, would one day stand at the center of the world's most dangerous geopolitical storm. Because at the start, there was no hunger for power, no dream of command, only curiosity, humor, and an instinct to perform. The instinct to make people feel something, to make them laugh, to make them listen. And this instinct followed him through school, through law studies he never truly planned to use, and into the chaotic freedom of the post-Soviet 1990s, where Ukraine was still defining what it meant to be a country, and where Zelensky found his real calling not in courtrooms, but on stages. Joining comedy groups, writing jokes, learning timing, learning how to read a room, learning perhaps the most underestimated skill of leadership, how to connect with people emotionally before asking anything of them. And as Ukraine struggled with corruption, identity, and the long shadow of Moscow, Zelensky was learning something else entirely: how narratives work, how heroes and villains are constructed, how crowds respond not to facts alone, but to feeling. And this education came not from books, but from laughter and applause, from failure and success, from endless rehearsals and performances, eventually leading him to create Kvartal 95, a comedy studio that would dominate Ukrainian entertainment, producing shows, films, satire that poked at politicians, mocked the powerful, and reflected the frustrations of ordinary citizens who felt betrayed by elites who promised change and delivered disappointment. And this is where the irony deepens, because long before Zelensky became a president, he played one on television, starring in the show Servant of the People, where he portrayed a humble schoolteacher who accidentally becomes president after a viral rant against corruption. A man with no political experience who tells the truth and shakes a broken system. And millions watched, laughed, and dreamed, because fiction was offering something reality had failed to deliver. And here, the line between performance and destiny began to blur. Because while Zelensky was acting out a fantasy, the country was quietly asking a dangerous question. What if this wasn't just a joke? What if the outsider was exactly what Ukraine needed? And as years passed, real politics grew darker, with Russia annexing Crimea in 2014, war smoldering in eastern Ukraine, trust in government collapsing, and fatigue spreading through the population. A psychological exhaustion that made people desperate for authenticity, for someone who felt different, someone unpolished, someone unafraid. And into this vacuum stepped a comedian with no political party, no governing experience, and no traditional backing, announcing in 2018 that he would run for president. And at first, the world laughed. Analysts dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Opponents mocked him as a clown. But beneath the jokes, something serious was happening. Because Zelensky understood the moment better than anyone. He understood that people were not just voting for policies. They were voting against humiliation, against lies, against a system that treated them like extras in someone else's story. And his campaign was unlike anything Ukraine had seen. Built on social media, short videos, direct communication, minimal traditional rallies. A campaign that felt less like politics and more like a conversation. And psychologically, it worked because it reduced distance, replaced authority with relatability. And when election day came in 2019, Zelensky didn't just win. He crushed the establishment, taking over 70% of the vote, a landslide that shocked Europe and sent a message across the region that something new had arrived. And yet, this was only the beginning, because winning an election is easy compared to governing a divided nation under constant threat. And almost immediately, Zelensky faced skepticism, pressure, and crises. Critics questioned his seriousness, his competence, his ability to face Vladimir Putin, a former intelligence officer who had spent decades consolidating power and who viewed Ukraine not as a sovereign equal, but as a historical mistake. And Zelensky, the former comedian, was now expected to navigate peace talks, economic reform, and a frozen war in the Donbass, all while learning on the job. And for a time, his presidency seemed fragile. Approval ratings dipped, reforms stalled, and some wondered if the joke had gone too far. But what few realized was that something fundamental was happening beneath the surface, because Zelensky was being forged by pressure, learning quickly, adapting, shedding the performer's skin, and growing into the weight of responsibility. And then came February 2022, the moment that would redefine not only his life, but the story of the 21st century, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Tanks rolling across borders, missiles striking cities, a calculated attempt to decapitate the Ukrainian government and install a puppet regime. And in those first hours, chaos reigned. Embassies evacuated. Analysts predicted Kiev would fall within days, maybe hours. And this is where the world expected Zelensky to disappear, to flee, to become a footnote. But instead, in one of the most psychologically powerful moments of modern leadership, he stayed, rejecting evacuation offers with the now legendary words, "I need ammunition, not a ride," a sentence so simple, yet so loaded, that it instantly reframed the conflict, because it told Ukrainians they were not alone. It told soldiers their leader shared their risk, and it told the world that this was not a weak state collapsing, but a nation preparing to fight. And every 5 to 8 seconds, the narrative shifted, from fear to defiance, from inevitability to uncertainty, from invasion to resistance. And Zelensky's nightly video addresses, filmed in bunkers, offices, streets, became a masterclass in modern wartime communication, blending honesty with resolve, vulnerability with strength, speaking directly to citizens, to allies, to enemies. Each message carefully calibrated not just to inform, but to motivate, to humanize, to sustain morale under unimaginable stress. And psychologically, this mattered as much as any weapon, because wars are fought not only with firepower, but with belief. And Zelensky, the former actor, understood the power of belief better than most generals. And as bombs fell on Kiev, Kharkiv, Mariupol, he did not retreat into silence. He leaned forward, speaking to parliaments around the world, tailoring his words to each audience, referencing Pearl Harbor in the United States, the Berlin Wall in Germany, the Blitz in the United Kingdom, weaving Ukraine's struggle into the historical memory of each nation, activating empathy, urgency, and moral clarity. And for American audiences, this was especially powerful, because it reframed Ukraine not as a distant conflict, but as a front line of democratic values. And support surged, military aid flowed, sanctions tightened, and slowly, shockingly, Ukraine held, pushing back Russian forces, defying predictions, rewriting assumptions. And throughout it all, Zelensky remained visible, exhausted, unshaven, resolute, his face becoming one of the most recognizable symbols of resistance on Earth. And yet, behind the camera, the toll was immense. Days without sleep, constant threat of assassination, the knowledge that every decision could cost thousands of lives. And this is where the glow-up becomes something darker and deeper, because Zelensky's transformation was not glamorous. It was brutal. It was the stripping away of illusion, the acceptance of sacrifice, the realization that leadership in war means carrying unbearable weight in silence. And historians will debate his policies, his strategies, his compromises. But what cannot be denied is the psychological shift that occurred. From entertainer to commander, from satirist to statesman. And this shift mattered because it altered how the world perceives power, proving that charisma and empathy, often dismissed as soft traits, can become strategic assets under extreme conditions. And as the war dragged on, with atrocities revealed, cities destroyed, families displaced, Zelensky faced impossible choices, balancing the need for peace with the refusal to surrender sovereignty, navigating alliances, managing expectations, asking for more weapons, while knowing every escalation carried risks beyond Ukraine's borders. And through it all, he continued to communicate, to show up, to speak plainly, understanding that in a fragmented media landscape, presence itself is power. And for Americans watching from afar, his story resonated deeply, echoing foundational myths of standing against tyranny, of ordinary individuals rising to extraordinary moments. And this resonance translated into sustained public support, congressional debates, and a renewed conversation about America's role in the world. And yet, the story is not over, because Zelensky's arc is still unfolding, the outcome uncertain, the costs rising, the future unclear. And this uncertainty is part of what makes the transformation so compelling. Because unlike scripted stories, there is no guaranteed ending. Only decisions made under pressure, values tested under fire, and a man who once made people laugh, now asking them to endure, to sacrifice, to believe. And this is the promise of this documentary, that by understanding how Volodymyr Zelensky became who he is today, you gain insight into how leaders are shaped not by ambition alone, but by circumstance. How history selects its protagonists from unexpected places, and how in moments of crisis, character matters more than credentials. And if you've stayed this far, you already feel it. The tension, the weight, the sense that this is more than biography. It is a mirror held up to our own assumptions about strength, courage, and identity. And as the war continues, and the world watches, the question remains open, not just about Ukraine's future, but about what this story will ultimately mean. And that open loop, that unanswered question, is why this story demands to be watched, discussed, remembered, because the glow-up nobody predicted is still happening, frame by frame, decision by decision. Under the harshest light, history can shine.